Welcome to all the men and women of the West and of Salamnia. I'm Joe, here from my co-host Dan.
Hello and greetings.
Today we're continuing our book club podcast on the Kagonesti. We're just going to do all of part 1 in this video, and then we're going to, next video of Dragonlance, get through part 2. So we're kind of going to speed along with this book, but let's be honest, there's not much that happens in this book. It's 2 separate anthology stories from what I can tell. Not much happens chapter to chapter. And after this book club podcast, per the request of a frequent viewer, we're going to get into the Chronicles. And that'll be something we do chapter by chapter,
that'll be fun.
Yeah, because the Chronicles are well written. This second chapter, or third chapter, gosh. Kirill and Dahl appear for the first time in this chapter, and Kagonesti, of course, has an encounter with Quithis, the guy he took the axe from. Chapter 3, though, has the ogres reaching the summit of a hill. Barkala, the chief of the Silver Trout, is mentioned and is leading the tribe in the battle. Dahl sees the other side of the basin and is a young elf. And the idea is that with the war horn that Kagonesti got from the dragon, he's to signal to the Elder Wild tribe and their 100 warriors to attack. The attack starts. The ogres charge towards the sound of the war horn, and battle is initiated. Chapter 4 sees the battle continued. Kagonesti captures the blue stone. Quithis complains later after the battle about his axe being visible, and that just the sight of it is dishonoring him, and that if it wasn't for those meddling kids and their dumb dog too, he'd have gotten away with it. With what? I don't know. It's just, I assume he's got a mustache to twirl. Sorry, the writing around Quithis is terrible. He's not well written. There is no nuance. He's just a bad guy. Which, you can have bad guys. Dragonlance has great bad guys who are pure evil. Lord South, even to an extent Kitiara Uf Matar, the King Priest, Takesis. But here it's so cartoonish that it's just jarring. There is not a scrap of humanity or any emotion other than hatred and anger in Quithis. And it just gets exhausting because it's like...
Well, it's Kagonesti. Hatred and anger towards him is a natural response.
Ouch. Darlington apparently battled with some blue dragons to gain some time. Chapter 5 sees Kagonesti leading some of the warriors in a battle. The tribe is sad because many died, including Dahl. And Kahana, Kagonesti's servant, I almost said slave, but she may as well be, was in love with Dahl. Okay, we care why. Oops. Was I supposed to say that? Kagonesti then determines he must visit the camp of Sylvanos. And we actually finally see Sylvanos. And he's actually a nice guy. He's actually really smart. And he's the guy who devised all the strategies. Because of course he did. Kagonesti doesn't have the brains to do that. Strategy, well, that's inferior and the tribesmen don't need that. I'm being facetious. It just seems like he's just everything positive that the Sylvanesti could possibly bring, he hates. Kagonesti is also jealous of the glory and popularity of Sylvanos. He is. It's very evident. It's not stated outright, but he is. Well, it's kind of stated almost outright. Sylvanos, though, to the frustration of Kagonesti, expresses a lot of sympathy for Kagonesti's tribe and people, which shows he's a nice guy. And the difference between the two is that the Sylvanesti took the brunt of the battle. They took the brunt of the damage. But Sylvanos still has it in him to mourn for his people, but also express sympathy and condolences to the rival tribe. Kagonesti, on the other hand, does not return those feelings. He's incapable of it. Bailiff, a general of Sylvanos, plans to establish a sub-nation of Sylvanos. I say sub-nation, but like a duchy, essentially, in the eastern woods of Sylvanesti. And the new province is going to be called Bailifor. Bailifor, though, now here's the thing. Sylvanos offers to give Bailifor to Kagonesti, so that his people could live in peace. You can kind of read a lot into the Servitor clan name that he offers to the Kagonesti, which would lower them to basically a servant house. Now, the line of Kagonesti would then be nobles, and I do think there's something unconscious there on Sylvanos' part, which is wrong of him. But when you consider the history of the Kagonesti throughout Dragonlance, Kagonesti is condemning them to a history of intertribal warfare, Stone Age technology, and warfare with the Sylvanesti and Qualinesti, which they can't win.
It's
So-
no wonder there are many in tribes that decide, oh, we get this if we join the Sylvanesti.
We get perks. We're leaving for Sylvanesti.
We want to be civilized.
Yeah. Quithis, though, apparently lost a son. Not that that's important. The book barely even touches it. And that's not even part of his motivations for anything. It doesn't actually do anything. It doesn't mean anything. The moons are taken note of, as this is the first time the gods of magic have been condemned to have moons. Kagonos claims that true freedom comes from living outside of cities and living in the wild, having none of the benefits of civilization, which I do get to an extent, but the trouble is there are degrees of non-civilization. For example, the kind of life that the Sumerians of Samaria live, where you have your tribe, you can build houses here and there. You do have houses, you do have blacksmithery, you do have some of the benefits of civilization, but your tribe, you belong to your set tribe. You can build a city, but the city is the tribe. The less civilized you become, the more violent and extreme the violence becomes. That being said, the more civilized the people become, the more violent they also become. So it has to be somewhere, I think, in the middle to an extent.
Everything in moderation.
Yeah, Kagonos, though, doesn't understand that. Moderation's not a virtue of his. And he, of course, blames the Sylvanesti for his people desiring to live in cities and for them desiring peace with the Sylvanesti elves. And the Sylvanesti elves, like, I don't know why he's blaming stuff on them. He doesn't want to accept the offer. Darlington, meanwhile, is found in chapter 6 and is dying. And there's a connection between the wild elves and the dragon that's forged, wherein Kagonos agrees that the Kagonesti elves would become the slaves of the silver dragons. Oh, I'm sorry. No, I mean, worshippers. Worshippers of the great silver dragons. They're basically slaves. They're to gather treasure and loot, bring it to the dragons, and live rather ignominious lives and mean lives for the silver dragons. And that's it. They're basically to live near the silver dragons, to do everything the silver dragons tell them to do at all times. Like, he says, I want freedom for my people, but then he says, oh yeah, we gotta serve the silver dragons. Okay, do you want freedom or not?
Quithis is like, got the blue orb, went back, and Kagonos like, oh, chances are Sylvanos will take credit even from Bailiff and the Kagonesti and just give it to Quithis. Oh,
Yeah, Sylvanos gave all the credit to Kagonos.
Yeah.
Which is very unmerited.
I take it as him being humble.
Yeah.
Him being humble and with guests.
But the thing is, with Sylvanos, he deserves all the credit. It was his plan. He basically affected the plan. He was in the front lines. He used himself as bait in the battle. The guy who pulled the entire thing off was Sylvanos. Kagonos was his general, for all intents and purposes. But now he wants to enslave his people to the Silver Dragons. I don't mind the Silver Dragons, but this book puts the relationship that's shown in the Legend of Huma and the Chronicles in a different perspective. These are slaves. These are not free men, or free elves, I should say.
Kagonos
sold them to the Silver Dragon for profit, essentially.
He should have taken Sylvanos'
I wouldn't go that far, but if he wants his people to be free, they should not be serving the Silver Dragons or Sylvanos.
Exactly. They should have said, no, we're just walking away from both.
But he didn't do that.
Hell, Sylvanos would be more like, oh, you want to roam free? Here's this patch of land. You can do whatever you want with it.
No, Sylvanos, I think, just adopts the attitude, okay, do what you want. Sylvanos is like, oh. Well, we'll get to what Sylvanos does and what he thinks. Quithis attacks in a cartoonish way Kagonos. Sylvanos is meanwhile trying to bribe the Kagonesti. He is trying to bribe them into becoming Sylvanesti. Kagonos is horrified by the notion of democracy because Sylvanos says, all right, listen, your people are going to vote whether they want to become Sylvanesti or not. Democracy? In this age? Says Kagonos. I'm kidding. He doesn't actually say that, but he's horrified that he's like, no, I already made a deal to sell my people into slavery. Don't you dare give them democracy.
The fact that this guy is like, the tribes all decide things together and discuss it, and
but then he's ruling as an absolute monarch.
He judges the Sylvanesti for
feudalism,
for democracy.
Now, the Sylvanesti actually have a system of government where the nobles, you have tanistry, but feudalism, sort of. It's a bit like the Greek Empire of the Middle Ages.
I suppose what I'm trying to say is Kagonos likes democracy until it doesn't serve him.
Yeah, you're right.
And He judged the Sylvanesti for having a ruler, and yet he wants to rule over the Kagonesti.
In the exact same way, yeah. It's ridiculous. Kagonos ends up accusing Sylvanos of having been in league with Quithis, and Sylvanos is actually really shocked and horrified to hear that Quithis tried to kill Kagonos, because that was never his intention. It's just Sylvanos is very naive. He believes all elves are inherently good. He doesn't realize that Kagonos hates him. Like, he doesn't understand that an elf he does not understand prejudices amongst the elves. That's the problem. He truly is naive. He's a child.
And
he does not understand that some of the Kagonesti are bigoted. It is beyond, and there are Sylvanesti who are bigoted. He does not understand this. Now, we'll get to that in another minute, but that said, Kagonos considered bringing the head of Quithis, but he didn't. So that in the next chapter, as stated, Sylvanos is fairly shocked and horrified at the death of Quithis. Sylvanos tries to plead with him not to divide the Kagonesti from the Sylvanesti, that they should all become one people. Now, his motivation and the way it's written, Sylvanos is totally right, but we'll get to that in a minute. Kagonos, though, calls upon magic with the war horn, which basically it feels like it enchants the people of the Kagonesti against this deal and convinces them, but I don't think it's his enchantment, but it's like, it feels like it, but they're convinced to not go with Sylvanos, but there's the implicit threat of a battle to the death, that Kagonos will instigate a full-on battle here. And he's basically telling his people, we're going to slaughter the Sylvanesti if you try to join them, or something like that. The implicit threat is there. It's basically on Sylvanos to agree to divide the tribes. Otherwise, there's going to be a bloodletting. Kagonos puts it before Sylvanos. You either slaughter my people, or I'll try to slaughter your people. And Sylvanos does not have the will to slaughter the Kagonesti. Instead, he calls them the Kagonesti and says, all right, go in peace, my brother. The reason Sylvanos does not want the Kagonesti to leave is that he predicts that in time, the Sylvanesti and Kagonesti will forget that they are actually originally one people, and this will lead to racial tension and will cause wars. Kagonesti's on board with it. He wants that. That's what he wants. Because he believes in this, he knows the same thing's going to happen, but his belief is that the Kagonesti may in time destroy the Sylvanesti. It's just pure hatred on his part. But Sylvanos, it fears for the Kagonesti more than he fears for his own people. According to this book, the Kagonesti are wrong and the Sylvanesti are right. I don't like saying that because the Sylvanesti in the Chronicles are jerks. No, like for a good deal of the Dragonlance mythos, they become big jerks, turning on Sylvanos' dream of all elves being brothers and singing Kumbaya. But the problem is Kagonos. He's just so ignorant. And you read from his perspective and you're left going, what a dumb moron.
I want to read the story from Sylvanos' point of view.
I know, I wanted the same thing. I just hated this story.
And I know I discussed it earlier with you, but I couldn't help but think, how is this guy a good warrior? A lance in one hand, an axe in the other?
But the main thing is the buckler is supposed to serve as a defensive obstacle for the enemy to keep them from actually killing him. But even if you say, okay, he could use the hatchet for that. If he favors the hatchet, how does he defend himself? You know, he's either attacking or defending. Because he can't defend with a spear. The entire logistic of that fight is mind-boggling. Quithis is one of my biggest points of contention. He's just such a cartoon villain.
Just a convenient guy for Kagonos to beat.
And it's basically like, oh, we're supposed to think of Kagonos as being right. But technically, Quithis is the guy who lost a son, so shouldn't we sympathize with him?
He's meant to be dwarfed. The general of the Griffin Riders.
But then he proves to be the dumbest guy ever in Dragonlance history. Yeah, we're going to divide this between part 1 and part 2 because they're technically 2 different books, or stories I should say. Let's rate this thing. I'll give it a half star for Sylvanos.
Yes, I was about to say the exact same thing.
If he was not in the story, and if he was not putting the really good philosophical arguments he was putting in, and moral arguments, this would be a 0.
Darlatan had to hold
Kagonos'
hand. Now go do this. Good
yeah.
boy.
Yeah, because Kagonos is too stupid to do it. And this is basically the father of the fatherland for the Kagonesti. And yet he's so... But the worst part is him actually selling his people as slaves to the Silver Dragons. It's like, oh yeah, I want my people to be free, but they have to serve the Silver Dragons.
What is freedom?
Yeah, like, it really does bring that into question. Like, are the Sylvanesti elves actually the free ones? Because they're getting to go into cities. They get to do whatever they want with their lives. They don't have to be hunter-gatherers. They get to do what they want. They have farmers. They have hunter-gatherers, of course. They get to have artisans, a top-down society. But the elves like it, and it's generally benevolent towards the elves.
Question is, what is freedom?
Yeah, is it a state of mind, or is it like...
Just the open fields.
Because here's the thing, if it's the open fields, well, you have to be also free in your heart and mind. But the problem is, with Kagonosti, he set it up so that they're slaves, figuratively, but they're free physically. That still means you're a slave. You're not actually free. It's just such a crock. It's such a crock. He's just... I just can't get behind this guy. But next time on Dragonlance, we'll be tackling the last bit of the book, finally. And then we'll get to the Chronicles. Praise Paladin. But if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to smash that like and that subscribe button as though you were the gods throwing a giant flaming mountain at Ishtar.